In the summer of 2011, a research team from Cascadia Research Collective attached a satellite tag to an adult blue whale feeding off the coast of Southern California. For several days, the animal worked a dense krill patch, diving, lunging, surfacing, repeating. Then something shifted in the water column. A change in current dispersed the patch. What the tag recorded next surprised the researchers. The whale did not simply move to the nearest alternative. It traveled for the better part of a week, covering hundreds of kilometers, burning fat reserves at a pace it could not sustain indefinitely, searching for a patch concentrated enough to make feeding worth attempting. A blue whale, the data suggested, would rather travel enormous distances than waste a dive on prey that would cost more energy to catch than it delivered. This single observation tells you more about the blue whale's biology than any measurement of its length or weight. Because we are not, in this video, talking about how large the blue whale is. We are talking about what that size demands and what it leaves the animal unable to afford. That question has a proper name in today's video. Blue whales shouldn't be this big. Here's what keeps them alive. What does it actually mean to be the largest animal in the history of complex life on this planet? Not the largest in terms of impressiveness, in terms of the biological problem it creates. Does size at this scale still function as an advantage? And if so, under what conditions does it stop? By the time this video ends, you will have 3 tools for thinking about those questions that apply well beyond the blue whale: an understanding of metabolic scaling, a framework for reading feeding energetics, and a clearer picture of why slow reproduction is one of the most underestimated vulnerabilities in large animal biology. Start with the measurements, because they establish the scale of every problem that follows. A fully grown female blue whale, the larger sex, reaches between 24 and 30 meters in length. Her weight falls somewhere between 150 and 180 metric tons at peak condition. Her heart weighs approximately 180 kilograms, roughly the size and mass of a compact car engine, and pumps blood through arteries wide enough for a small child to crawl through. Her tongue alone outweighs a mature elephant. These are not just record-breaking numbers. They are the physical specifications of an animal that has pushed past every size threshold any mammal before it navigated, and in doing so has had to solve problems that no other mammal faces. The blue whale feeds on krill, small crustaceans in the order Eupausiacea, typically 1 to 6 centimeters long. In the North Pacific, primarily Eupausia pacifica. In the Southern Ocean, Eupausia superba. At peak feeding season, an adult blue whale needs to consume roughly 40 million individual krill per day, approximately 4 metric tons of prey every 24 hours. That feeding window, concentrated in summer months, must generate enough caloric surplus to fuel long migrations into warmer, krill-poor waters, where the animal may eat almost nothing for months at a time. Everything depends on making those summer dives count. The most obvious argument for why size is a pure advantage goes like this. The blue whale has no predator. Orcus orxinus orca have been recorded harassing blue whales, particularly targeting calves or compromised individuals, but documented kills of healthy adults are extraordinarily rare in the scientific literature. Every other marine predator is simply outclassed. A great white shark that dwarfs any human swimmer is, relative to a blue whale, roughly the equivalent of a mouse approaching a horse. Size in this framing is near perfect armor. There is also a genuine thermal argument. Larger bodies have a more favorable geometry for heat retention as an object grows. Its volume increases faster than its surface area, which means less heat is lost relative to the mass generating it. Think of it like comparing a single ice cube to a large block of ice containing the same total volume of water. The thousands of tiny cubes melt far faster because they expose far more surface area to the warm air. A blue whale in near-freezing polar waters retains core body heat with an efficiency that no smaller cetacean can match, and this extends its feeding range into the most productive ocean regions on Earth. And competitively, No other species is targeting krill at this scale with comparable efficiency. In purely defensive and thermal terms, the case for extreme size looks solid. But every single one of these advantages rests on a dependency. And the dependencies are far more fragile than the advantages appear. So what are they, and how close to the edge do they push the largest animal alive? The first constraint is geometric, and it operates at every scale of biology from single cells to ecosystems. As an object increases in size, volume grows as the cube of its dimensions, while surface area grows only as the square. Double the length of a whale, and its surface area quadruples. But its volume, and with it, the number of cells that must be fed, oxygenated, and serviced increases eightfold. This means that raw metabolic demand in absolute terms scales steeply with body size. Now, large animals do not pay that bill at full price. In 1932, physiologist Max Kleiber documented what has since been called Kleiber's law: metabolic rate scales not linearly with body mass, but with body mass raised to the power of approximately 0.75. What this means is that per kilogram of body weight, large animals burn energy more slowly than small ones. A blue whale is metabolically cheaper to run per unit of mass than a harbor seal, which is cheaper per unit than a sea otter, which is cheaper per unit than a mouse. The mouse, burning through calories at a frantic pace to maintain its tiny body temperature, would find the blue whale's metabolic rate almost unrecognizable by comparison. This is a real advantage, but it does not erase the total bill. At 150 metric tons, even a metabolically efficient organism needs an enormous absolute amount of energy per day, and that energy must come entirely from krill patches that are neither uniformly distributed nor predictably stable. So does efficient metabolism actually solve the blue whale's feeding problem, or does it only reduce how bad it would otherwise be? The second constraint is dietary. The blue whale is not just large, it is a specialist. Its baleen plates, the keratin filters that replace teeth in its evolutionary lineage, are optimized for krill. Its jaw mechanics, its lunge behavior, its seasonal migration routes, all calibrated for dense krill aggregations. Unlike sharks, orcas, or sperm whales, which can redirect to different prey when one species becomes scarce, the blue whale cannot meaningfully substitute. When krill patches thin out, the blue whale does not have a backup plan. It has a worse version of its only plan. Research from Jeremy Goldbogen's lab at Stanford University has made this specificity quantitative. Using biologging tags attached to blue whales, Goldbogen's team documented that blue whales selectively initiate feeding lunges based on krill density passing through patches that appear to contain prey, but not at concentrations high enough to justify the energetic cost of a lunge. The whale is not filter feeding indiscriminately. It is calculating, and what it is calculating continuously is whether the prey on offer is worth the energy that catching it will cost. That calculation takes us to the third constraint. The economics of lunge feeding are tighter than most people realize. A blue whale feeding lunge involves the animal accelerating from low speed, opening its jaws to engulf a volume of water that can approximate its own body mass, then using its massive tongue and baleen plates to force that water out while retaining the krill. The drag during this maneuver is enormous. The muscular effort required to open the jaw against water resistance at speed is, by Goldbogen's estimates, one of the most energetically costly single movements documented in any animal. Here is a way to feel that. Intuitively imagine trying to fill a bucket by sprinting into a river with it open. The faster and denser the river, the more water you capture per run. But every run costs you energy, and if the river thins to a trickle, you are spending the same physical effort for a fraction of the return. Now imagine you must complete this motion hundreds of times per day just to break even on your daily caloric needs. That is lunge feeding in poor conditions, and it is where the blue whale's size works against it. The larger the animal, the greater the energetic cost of each lunge, and the higher the minimum prey density needed for that lunge to pay off. A blue whale cannot profitably feed on sparse krill. It requires patches dense enough that the return on each dive outweighs the investment, and those patches are not guaranteed by any calendar. Which raises the obvious question, if all of this is true, why did blue whales evolve to this size? Why did the constraints not stop the process earlier? The fourth constraint offers part of the answer, and it is the one with the most direct consequences for conservation. Size in the blue whale came at the cost of reproductive speed. Blue whales reach sexual maturity between 5 and 10 years of age. Females carry a single calf through a gestation of 10 to 12 months. That calf nurses for 6 to 7 months, consuming up to 200 liters of fat-rich milk daily and gaining roughly 90 kilograms per day, one of the fastest individual growth rates recorded in any animal. After weaning, the female typically does not conceive again for another 2 to 3 years. The result, one calf, at best, every 2 to 3 years per female. Compare that to a minke whale, which can reproduce annually, or to a fish, which may release millions of eggs in a single season. Now consider what happens when a slow reproducing species encounters a catastrophic mortality event. Before industrial whaling began in the early 20th century, global blue whale populations were estimated somewhere between 150,000 and 300,000 individuals. Factory ships, operating from the early 1900s through the mid-20th century, reduced that number to somewhere between 400 and 1,400 animals by the time the International Whaling Commission issued a moratorium on blue whale hunting in 1966. As of the most recent population assessments, global numbers stand at roughly 10,000 to 25,000 individuals, still a fraction of pre-whaling levels more than half a century after protection began. The recovery has been slow, not because whaling continues, it largely does not, but because a species producing one calf every 2 to 3 years cannot rebuild a population quickly under any circumstances. Size brought the blue whale near invulnerability to every predator that preceded humanity. It also meant that when a new apex predator arrived, one equipped with explosive harpoons and factory processing ships, the blue whale had almost no demographic capacity to absorb the losses. The same reproductive strategy that worked across millions of years of evolution became a liability within decades. The deeper question this raises is whether the blue whale is actually near the physical ceiling of how large an animal can get, not just in practice, but in principle. Biomechanical models developed by Goldbogen and colleagues have suggested that the efficiency of lunge feeding increases with body size up to a point, after which the energetic cost of each lunge grows faster than the caloric return. Under this model, the current size range of the blue whale is not simply the largest size that happened to evolve. It may be close to the largest size that can remain energetically viable given the constraints of filter feeding in real ocean conditions. No confirmed animal in the fossil record has exceeded the body mass of the largest blue whales. Whether that reflects an evolutionary ceiling defined by biomechanics, or simply the limits of what the fossil record has preserved, is a question researchers are still working through. So, is the blue whale's size an advantage or a burden? The answer, built across everything in this video, is that the question is incomplete. Size is a strategy, and like all biological strategies, it functions within a specific range of conditions. Blue whales shouldn't be this big, and yet they persist because the conditions that make their size viable have, for most of their evolutionary history, been met: cold, productive polar oceans, dense krill aggregations, and an absence of predators capable of targeting them at scale. Under those conditions, the blue whale is arguably the most energetically successful large predator that has ever lived. But those conditions are not fixed. They shift with climate, with ocean chemistry, and with the presence of industrial krill harvesting in the Southern Ocean. The blue whale's size is not an unconditional asset. It is an asset that requires an ocean behaving in very particular ways to remain one. There is one element of blue whale behavior that current research has not resolved, and it is the one that connects every thread this video has followed. When krill availability drops below the threshold needed to make feeding viable, individual blue whales make different choices. Some linger and push through poor conditions. Others abandon the ground entirely and invest in long-distance travel to find better patches. Tag data suggests these differences are consistent across years within individuals, which raises an intriguing possibility: is there meaningful variation in how well individual blue whales read their environment? And if so, does that variation influence who survives a bad krill season and who does not? Whether this reflects heritable differences in cognition or foraging strategy, or simply variation in body condition and fat reserves going into a lean period, is not yet established. If you have followed any of the long-term tracking projects that have released data publicly, or if you want to push back on any of the energetic calculations covered here, the comments are where that conversation should happen. The most specific and substantive observations from this audience shape what this channel explores next.